Disclaimer: this is not a mixing tutorial, I am not a mixing engineer, and you will not get your money back. Viewer discretion is advised. So, we've all heard the story about how you need to outsource mixing, right? Don't mix your own tracks, you need fresh ears. Let's be realistic here. You're a bedroom producer. You live in your parents' basement. And a professional mix is expensive. $100? Like, that's a lot. You'd probably want to spend that someplace else. I mean, duh, otherwise you wouldn't be watching a mixing tutorial right now. I mean, a not mixing tutorial right now. And since we're already here, I guess I might as well show you how to actually approach the process of mixing. Because if you don't know how to approach it, it's all kinda useless. So let's get to it. First things first, we need to talk about reference tracks. I want you to imagine that you're out on a road trip to a place you haven't been to before. You might know the general direction of where you want to go, but you probably don't know the exact road you need to take. So you probably want to open up Google Maps and type your destination in. Otherwise, you risk ending up in a completely different place. And not using a reference track is like not using Google Maps during a road trip. You need to know where your destination is in order to get to it. And in case you haven't heard 100 times before already, a reference track is an industry standard song in a similar genre that you want to make. It's basically a track that you want to sound like. And you need to use reference tracks in the mixing process, as much as you need to use Google Maps during a road trip. Makes sense, right? But with Google Maps, it's easy. You just type your destination in and you're all set. With mixing, not so much. So how do you actually use reference tracks? That's exactly what I'm going to show you today. I've worked out a method which I've called the D&D approach, and no, it doesn't have anything to do with Dungeons and Dragons, trust me, because the first D stands for DAW. While you're still inside your DAW, I want you to load your reference track into a separate audio channel. And you need to make sure it's not getting affected by any effects in your DAW. So you need to turn off warping and make sure the audio goes to external out and not the master channel, so that it's not affected by the effects you have on the master. And speaking of the master channel, make sure to bring your track up to a similar loudness level as your reference track. You can check that with a loudness meter like MV meter. It's kinda like a rough mastering job you need to do. And it's important to do it so that your mixing decisions don't get influenced by the loudness difference. Okay, so now you can start referencing. So turn off the track with the reference and solo it whenever you need to hear it. And you can also bind the solo button to a key on your keyboard for a smoother workflow. And to do that in Ableton, you're going to need to go into the key binding mode up here, click the solo button of the reference track, and pressing any key. I usually bind it to R for reference. And now, when you press R on your keyboard, you will switch between listening to your track and the reference track. So listen and hear if there's a difference between your track and the reference track, in terms of like frequencies and all that. I often find, for example, that my mix is a little bit muddy compared to the reference track. There's not enough high frequencies. So equipped with that information, I usually then go back to my track and increase the high frequencies somehow, which I'm not going to show you how to do today, because again, this is not a mixing tutorial. Just reference and adjust until you don't hear that much of a difference. Now look. We talked about reference tracks, but there's another crucial thing that we need to address. And let's go back to the road trip scenario for a second. Let's say you've got Google Maps opened up, that's cool and all, but imagine that your phone is all dirty, the screen is cracked, and it's just not bright enough. You have to constantly squint your eyes to see anything on the screen. It's gonna make it quite a lot harder to get to your destination, don't you think? Which is exactly why you need a good monitor, which is what the N stands for. Oh. A monitor can mean a big screen in our GPS road trip scenario, but it can also mean a good pair of speakers or headphones in the context of mixing. A good monitoring situation is essential for achieving a good mixdown. But yeah, I'm assuming if you don't have the money to outsource mixing, you're probably not gonna have it for a good pair of studio monitors either. Though, worry not, there is a workaround, sort of. chances are that you have lots of different monitoring systems, be it your headphones, your Bluetooth earbuds, maybe your Bluetooth speaker, the speakers in your car, and heck, even the speakers in your phone. If you listen on all these different systems, you're going to get a much better idea of how your track sounds. And you will often hear different things depending on the system. I often export my track and upload it to Google Drive so that I can open it on my phone and listen to it anywhere. And it also has a built-in note-taking system, which is pretty helpful. But there's one thing to keep in mind. You still need reference tracks. It wouldn't really make sense to have all these different monitors open on your road trip if you didn't have Google Maps open on any of them, right? That would be pretty stupid. So when you're listening to your track in your car, for example, you can open up Spotify or SoundCloud and play your track back to back with your reference track. And again, take notice of the differences that you hear and write them down. And you know, some cars, for example, just have shitty speaker systems by default, and even the reference tracks are going to sound shit on them. And in that case, your goal should not be to make your track sound good on them, but rather to make your track sound as bad as the reference track in that same way. I hope you understand what I'm getting at here. So once you write down the differences that you hear, you can move on to the next step in my formula. The second D, which stands for DAW. Yeah, again. Here you just address the notes that you took in the previous step, and then you can export that and listen on a different sound system, and rinse and repeat that process until you hate yourself. Until you have a finished mixdown. And speaking of a finished mixdown, you might want to know some techniques to actually achieve it. I didn't show you any today because, again, this video was not a mixing tutorial. If you want to watch an actual mixing tutorial, click right here. Click it.